Welcome to our channel. Today, we will talk about an exciting and tense period in the history of mankind, when the world was on the verge of nuclear war. At the center of our narrative are two key figures: U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. Their confrontation during the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis left an indelible mark on world history. Stay tuned to find out how these two leaders led their countries on the brink of disaster and how miraculously they managed to avoid a nuclear apocalypse. Introduction to the Cold War. Context and background. The Cold War began after the end of World War I, when the world was divided into two warring camps: the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the socialist East, led by the USSR. Both superpowers sought to expand their influence around the world, which led to numerous conflicts in the nature of geopolitical rivalry. After World War I, many European countries lay in ruins, and the United States initiated the Marshall Plan to help them recover. This was one of the first steps in strengthening the Western Bloc. At the same time, the USSR strengthened its influence in Eastern Europe, establishing control over the countries that would later become members of the Warsaw Pact. An interesting fact: one of the first serious crises of the Cold War was the Berlin Crisis of 1948–1949, when the USSR blocked all routes to West Berlin, hoping to capture it. In response, the United States and its allies organized the Berlin Airlift, supplying the city with the necessary resources. The rise of Kennedy, a young leader amid global threats. John F. Kennedy became President of the United States in January 1961. He came to power amid rising tensions between East and West. In his inaugural address, Kennedy stated that the United States is ready to pay any price, bear any burden, confront any enemy in order to ensure the survival and success of freedom. These words became a symbol of his determination to confront the communist threat. Kennedy was a young and energetic leader who sought to modernize and strengthen the U.S. military. He also paid great attention to the development of the space program, which led to the famous announcement of the intention to send a man to the moon before the end of the decade. Fun fact: one of Kennedy's key goals was to establish a direct telephone line between the White House and the Kremlin to prevent accidental conflicts. This hot phone has become a symbol of attempts to establish direct communication between the two superpowers. The rise of Khrushchev. From corn to Cuba. Nikita Khrushchev became the leader of the USSR after Stalin's death in 1953. He carried out a number of significant reforms aimed at de-Stalinizing the country and improving the lives of Soviet citizens. Khrushchev sought to show the world that socialism was capable of competing with capitalism, and actively promoted the scientific and technological achievements of the USSR. One of Khrushchev's favorite topics was corn. He believed that this culture would help improve agriculture and feed the country. His famous corn promotion campaign has been the subject of many anecdotes and cartoons. However, despite this, Khrushchev remained a serious and determined leader, ready to defend the interests of the USSR on the world stage. An interesting point: during a visit to the United States in 1959, Khrushchev declared that the Soviet Union would bury the West in economic competition. These words caused a wide response and became a symbol of his aggressive rhetoric. The Cuban Revolution. A new battlefield. The Cuban Revolution of 1959 led to the overthrow of the pro-Western dictator Fulgencio Batista and the rise to power of Fidel Castro. Castro established close ties with the USSR, which caused alarm in the United States. In April 1961, shortly after Kennedy took office, there was an unsuccessful attempt to land Cuban immigrants in the Bay of Pigs, organized by the CIA. This defeat further strained relations between the United States and Cuba. The Soviet Union saw in Cuba an opportunity to create a strategic foothold near the American coast. In response to the deployment of American missiles in Turkey, Khrushchev decided to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. This decision led to the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Funny fact: during one of the meetings with Castro, Khrushchev joked that if Cuba stores nuclear missiles as securely as it stores cigars, then the United States will have no chance of finding them. The development of the crisis. October 1962. The crisis reached its climax in October 1962. when American reconnaissance aircraft discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. Kennedy announced the imposition of a naval blockade of Cuba and demanded the immediate removal of missiles. In his address to the nation, Kennedy said that any use of these missiles against the United States would be considered an act of aggression by the USSR, which would lead to the complete elimination of Cuba. Khrushchev responded by threatening to launch a nuclear strike against the United States in the event of an attack on Cuba. The world was on the verge of nuclear war, and it seemed that disaster was inevitable. Both leaders understood that further escalation of the conflict could lead to global destruction. An interesting point. During the crisis, the Kremlin and the White House had round-the-clock headquarters that analyzed every move of the enemy. One day, Khrushchev, hearing about the proposal of one of his generals to launch a preemptive strike, exclaimed, "Do you want to burn down the whole world? Think with your head." The crisis continues. Tensions are rising. The days of the crisis passed in an atmosphere of extreme tension. Kennedy and Khrushchev exchange messages, trying to find a way out of the situation. At this time, the world community froze in anticipation. Journalists and experts discussed possible scenarios, and most of them were pessimistic. One of the key moments of the crisis came on October 27, 1962, when a Soviet submarine off the coast of Cuba was discovered by American ships. The Americans began dropping depth charges to force the submarine to surface. The captain of the submarine, having no connection with Moscow, took this as the beginning of the war and was ready to launch a nuclear strike. It was only thanks to the common sense of one of the submarine's officers, who insisted on waiting for orders from Moscow, that disaster was avoided. Fun fact, during one of the meetings, Kennedy joked, "If a nuclear war starts because of a submarine that no one has seen, then it will be the most ridiculous end in the history of mankind." Crisis resolution. Steps towards peace on October 28, 1962. The crisis reached its denouement. Khrushchev agreed to remove Soviet missiles from Cuba in exchange for a promise by the United States not to invade the island and to remove its missiles from Turkey. This agreement was reached through intensive negotiations and an exchange of messages between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Kennedy announced the end of the blockade and the beginning of the process of dismantling missiles in Cuba. The world breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that a nuclear war had been averted. Both leaders have demonstrated the ability to compromise and responsibility to their peoples and the whole world. An interesting point. After the crisis was resolved, Kennedy and Khrushchev began exchanging personal letters discussing opportunities for further improvement of relations between the United States and the USSR. These letters became the basis for future arms control negotiations. The consequences of the crisis. Lessons and heritage. The Cuban Missile Crisis has left a deep mark on history and has become a lesson for all world leaders. He showed how dangerous nuclear standoff can be and how important it is to have channels for direct communication between countries in order to prevent accidental conflicts. As a result of the crisis, a hotline was established between Washington and Moscow, which allowed the leaders of the two countries to communicate directly in case of emergencies. The crisis also stimulated the start of arms control negotiations. In 1963, the treaty banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, space and underwater was signed, which was the first step towards limiting nuclear weapons. Funny fact, after the crisis in the USA and the USSR, many films and books were created dedicated to this event. One of the most famous films, Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, which satirically depicts the possible consequences of a nuclear conflict. Influence on the political careers of Kennedy and Khrushchev. The crisis had a significant impact on the political careers of both leaders. For Kennedy, the resolution of the crisis was an important achievement that strengthened his position at home and on the international stage. His determination and ability to compromise were highly appreciated, and he became a symbol of hope for a peaceful resolution of conflicts. However, Khrushchev was not so lucky. Despite the fact that he was able to avoid a nuclear war, many in the Soviet leadership considered his actions too risky and short-sighted. In 1964, Khrushchev was removed from the post of First Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU and replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. Khrushchev retired and lived the rest of his life in relative isolation, writing memoirs. An interesting point. In his memoirs, Khrushchev wrote that despite all the difficulties and tension, He always believed in the possibility of a peaceful resolution of the conflict and was ready to compromise in order to preserve peace. **** Memory and legacy. What's left after the crisis? ***, the Cuban Missile Crisis has left an indelible mark on the memory of generations. It has become a symbol of how close the world has come to a nuclear catastrophe and how important the responsibility of leaders for the future of humanity is. The lessons of the crisis continue to be learned in schools and universities, and its history reminds us of the fragility of peace and the need for international cooperation. Fun fact: in 2012, on the 50th anniversary of the crisis, an exhibition dedicated to this event was held in Cuba. Among the exhibits were letters and documents related to the crisis, as well as unique photographs and artifacts of that time. The exhibition attracted many visitors and became a reminder of the importance of preserving peace. Kennedy and Khrushchev, two great leaders of their time, were able to avert disaster and preserve peace during the most difficult moments of the Cold War. Their confrontation and ability to compromise have become a lesson for future generations. The Cuban Missile Crisis has shown that even in the most tense situations, there is always an opportunity for dialogue and peaceful resolution of conflicts. If you like this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so that you don't miss new exciting stories. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.